In September 1939, dozens of merchant vessels departed North Atlantic ports on recorded routes, with registered cargoes and designated destinations. Each departure followed standard procedure: sailing times entered in port logs, pilots discharged, signal stations recording the crossing of control lines. Radio call signs were assigned, transmission schedules established. Some of these vessels sent no signals after their first day at sea. Convoy manifests listed complete columns. Escort reports recorded the number of ships at departure and at dispersal. In several cases, the difference between those numbers was not accompanied by any entry noting attack, explosion, damage, or distress signal. No wreckage was found. No loss coordinates were entered. Radio logs showed no transmissions. Coastal reports contained no observations. Insurance registers carried the notation overdue. In the months that followed, the same names reappeared on expected arrival lists. They appeared in company inquiries, internal circulars, and registry cards with identical fields: date of sailing, port, tonnage, route. The column marked confirmation remained blank. No document recorded the moment of disappearance. No record described what occurred between the point of departure and the intended destination. In September 1939, merchant vessels continued to depart European and North American ports under standing commercial schedules that had been issued before the declaration of hostilities. Port authorities in Liverpool, Glasgow, Cardiff, Brest, Halifax, New York, and Norfolk maintained clearance procedures that reflected peacetime regulations, with only partial amendments introduced through emergency notices. Ships cleared harbor under civilian registry, carrying mixed cargoes of foodstuffs, fuel, industrial materials, and general goods. Radio silence was not uniformly enforced during the first weeks, and routing instructions varied between naval districts. By October 1939, naval authorities issued formal directives requiring merchant shipping to follow assigned lanes and to report departure times, cargo manifests, tonnage, and intended destinations to regional control offices. These reports were logged in paper registries maintained by naval transport sections. Escort availability remained limited. Several sailings proceeded without naval accompaniment, particularly in the North Atlantic and the Bay of Biscay. Ships that departed singly were recorded as independent sailings, their progress tracked through scheduled position reports transmitted by wireless. During this period, a number of vessels failed to submit expected position reports. Naval control offices annotated these absences with time and date, noting missed transmissions without further explanation. In some cases, weather interference was recorded. In others, no cause was listed. These ships remained on registries as overdue. Port authorities awaited confirmation through Lloyd's Shipping Intelligence or naval reconnaissance. No immediate conclusions were entered into official logs. In November 1939, convoy assembly points were designated at specific latitudes west of the British Isles and east of Newfoundland. Merchant ships were instructed to assemble under escort before proceeding through designated routes. However, convoy discipline remained inconsistent. Several vessels departed late or arrived early and proceeded independently. Naval escorts logged departures and handovers, recording the number of ships under protection and the time at which escort responsibility ended. Submarine activity was reported across multiple sea lanes. Naval intelligence summaries compiled from sighting reports, wireless intercepts, and post-action escort reports indicated the presence of enemy submarines operating submerged during daylight and surfaced at night. These summaries were circulated daily to fleet commands and convoy control offices. They included estimated positions and times but did not always correlate with known losses. Between December 1939 and February 1940, several convoys experienced reductions in ship numbers during transit. Escort logs recorded instances of explosions, oil slicks, or debris observed astern. In some cases, no visual or auditory indicators were noted, and ships were later found missing from arrival lists. Naval clerks compared departure manifests with arrival reports, marking discrepancies. For certain hull numbers, no distress signals were received, and no wreckage was recovered. In the North Sea, minefields were laid by both sides according to operational orders. Navigational warnings were issued through naval channels, but delays in dissemination resulted in incomplete coverage. Merchant ships departing Scandinavian ports transited waters where recent mine-laying operations had been conducted. Losses were recorded when mines were struck and explosions observed. In other instances, vessels failed to arrive at destination ports without any recorded detonation reports. Harbor masters filed overdue notices, and insurance registries updated ship status to missing. By April 1940, naval authorities expanded convoy requirements to additional routes. Escort vessels were assigned according to availability, often rotating between convoys. Logs maintained aboard destroyers and corvettes recorded course changes, weather conditions, and contact reports. When convoys dispersed due to weather or operational orders, individual ships were instructed to proceed independently. Subsequent tracking depended on scheduled wireless reports. In May 1940, following changes in territorial control along the European coastline, merchant traffic patterns were altered. Evacuation movements were conducted under urgent orders, with large numbers of civilian and auxiliary vessels departing ports under limited coordination. Lists of participating vessels were compiled rapidly. Some ships departed without formal registration. After these operations, naval offices attempted to reconcile departure lists with return records. A number of vessels were not accounted for. Their last known positions were recorded based on departure times and intended routes. Throughout 1940, convoy reports from the Atlantic documented recurring cases of ships failing to complete passage. Escort commanders submitted after-action reports noting the number of ships escorted, the duration of escort, and any incidents observed. When a ship was not present at the dispersal point or destination, the report noted its absence without elaboration. Subsequent inquiries relied on intelligence summaries and intercepted enemy communications, which were not always conclusive. In early 1941, improved escort coverage reduced some losses, but long-range routes remained exposed. Convoys sailing from West African ports, the Caribbean, and South America experienced extended periods without air cover. Ships departing Freetown and Trinidad were logged into convoy registers and assigned numbers. During transit, weather conditions often disrupted formation integrity. Escort logs recorded ships falling astern or altering course due to mechanical issues. When these ships did not rejoin and no signals were received, their status was recorded as missing. Arctic routes introduced additional variables. Convoys sailing to northern ports operated under extreme weather conditions. Ice reports were issued by naval meteorological sections. Ships encountered fog, snow, and heavy seas. Wireless communication was limited. Escort vessels recorded navigational hazards and noted ships losing visual contact. When convoys reached destination ports, discrepancies between departure and arrival lists were entered into official records. In some cases, ice damage was presumed. No confirmation was entered. In mid-1941, administrative procedures required formal notification to next of kin when ships were declared lost. Before such declarations, naval offices maintained ships on missing status for extended periods. Daily shipping summaries continued to list these vessels without additional detail. Insurance underwriters and shipping companies submitted inquiries. Naval responses cited lack of information. In the Mediterranean, supply convoys faced air and submarine threats. Departures from Alexandria, Malta, and Gibraltar were logged by naval transport offices. Escort compositions were recorded. During passages, air attacks were logged with time and coordinates. Some ships were seen to be hit. Others were last observed intact before separation. When arrival ports reported reduced numbers, loss lists were updated accordingly. For several vessels, no attack reports corresponded to their disappearance. In late 1941, Japanese naval operations expanded across the Pacific. Merchant shipping under Allied Registry departed ports in Southeast Asia under evacuation and supply orders. Records from port authorities in Manila, Singapore, and Batavia documented departures amid congested conditions. Some vessels sailed without full documentation. Subsequent loss reports were incomplete. Naval intelligence summaries noted gaps in shipping data. Throughout this period, naval documentation maintained a consistent format. Departure logs, convoy manifests, escort reports, and arrival lists formed the basis of shipping records. When ships failed to arrive and no confirmed loss was recorded, their status remained unresolved. Files accumulated with annotations indicating last known position, date of last contact, and cargo. No further entries were made unless new information was received. By the end of 1941, shipping control offices held extensive lists of vessels recorded as missing. These lists were circulated internally. They contained ship names, tonnage, departure ports, dates, and intended destinations. No narrative explanations accompanied these entries. The records reflected the administrative process as it occurred, noting only what had been reported, observed, or logged at the time. In January 1942, shipping control offices continued to compile daily summaries of merchant vessel movements across the Atlantic, Pacific, Arctic, and Indian Ocean routes. Clerks transcribed incoming wireless messages, escort reports, and port arrival notices into standardized ledgers. Each entry listed vessel name, registry, gross tonnage, cargo category, departure port, date of sailing, convoy designation if applicable, and destination port. Where arrival confirmation was absent beyond the expected transit window, the entry was annotated as overdue. No alteration to status was made without confirmation from Naval Command. Convoy assembly procedures were revised to reduce independent sailings. Merchant vessels arriving early at rendezvous points were instructed to maintain position until escort arrival. Weather delays affected compliance. Logs from escort commanders recorded instances where ships failed to maintain station due to engine limitations or navigational error. When visual contact was lost and could not be re-established, escorts continued with remaining vessels under orders to preserve convoy integrity. Submarine contact reports increased in frequency. Escort logs documented sonar detections, depth charge deployments, and evasive maneuvers. In some cases, merchant vessels altered course independently following perceived threats. Subsequent arrival lists reflected reduced numbers without corresponding engagement reports. These discrepancies were noted in convoy summaries without attribution. In the North Atlantic, winter conditions disrupted wireless communication. Ice accumulation damaged aerials and reduced transmission range. Scheduled position reports were missed. Naval radio monitoring stations logged periods of silence from designated call signs. These absences were forwarded to shipping control offices, which cross-referenced convoy schedules and weather reports. Entries remained unchanged pending further information. Off the eastern seaboard of North America, coastal shipping operated under blackout conditions. Harbor masters issued sailing clearances with restricted lighting orders. Despite these measures, submarine activity was reported close to shore. Merchant vessels sailing independently between coastal ports were recorded as sunk when explosions were observed from land or when survivors reached shore. In other cases, ships failed to arrive and no coastal reports were received. These vessels were listed as missing with last known departure times. In the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, oil tankers and cargo ships continued operations under revised routing instructions. Convoy coverage was intermittent. Naval district reports documented attacks confirmed by survivors or wreckage. For several departures, no follow-up information was received. Shipping companies submitted loss notifications based on missed arrivals. Naval authorities acknowledged receipt without confirmation. Pacific operations expanded following hostilities in December 1941. Merchant vessels under Allied Registry were ordered to evacuate personnel and material from threatened ports. Port congestion limited documentation. Departure logs were incomplete. Ships sailed under urgent orders, sometimes without convoy or escort. Subsequent enemy advances disrupted record-keeping at destination ports. Loss reports were compiled from fragmentary signals, survivor accounts, and intercepted communications. Some vessels were entered as missing without corroboration. In the Indian Ocean, convoys departed from ports in India, Ceylon, and East Africa. Escort assignments were limited. Ships proceeded independently for portions of the route. Submarine sightings were reported intermittently. Escort logs noted evasive actions without confirmed engagements. Arrival ports reported reduced numbers. Shipping control offices recorded discrepancies and maintained missing status entries. Administrative correspondence between naval commands addressed the accumulation of unresolved cases. Memoranda requested clarification where possible. Responses cited lack of contact, absence of wreckage, and no intercepted enemy claims. Files were retained for future reference. By mid-1942, convoy routing adjustments altered expected transit times. Shipping control offices updated schedules accordingly. Overdue calculations were revised. Some vessels previously listed as overdue arrived after extended delays due to weather or rerouting. Their status was amended to arrived. Others remained unaccounted for. No further action was recorded. In Arctic operations, convoys encountered heavy ice and enemy air activity. Escort reports detailed bomb attacks, near misses, and ice damage. Some merchant vessels were ordered to scatter under threat. Subsequent arrival reports reflected losses. For several scattered ships, no confirmation of destruction or survival was received. These vessels were listed as missing with last reported positions. In the Mediterranean, supply routes to island garrisons continued under constant air threat. Convoy departure lists were matched against arrival manifests. Ships hit during air attacks were documented. Others disappeared between ports without recorded engagements. Naval intelligence summaries noted probable causes without formal attribution. Shipping records maintained missing status. Throughout late 1942, shipping companies and insurers pressed for resolution. Naval authorities reiterated procedures requiring confirmation before declaration of loss. Periodic reviews of missing lists were conducted. Entries were checked against new intelligence. In rare cases, enemy records or prisoner interrogations provided confirmation. Most entries remained unchanged. By early 1943, improvements in escort coverage and air patrols altered loss patterns. Shipping control offices observed fewer unexplained disappearances on certain routes. However, long-range operations continued to produce missing cases. Convoys to the South Atlantic and Indian Ocean experienced gaps in reporting. Escort logs documented separations due to mechanical failure. Ships falling behind were instructed to proceed independently. Subsequent arrivals were inconsistent. In the Pacific, island-hopping operations generated complex logistics movements. Merchant vessels operated alongside naval auxiliaries. Record-keeping varied by theater. Some losses were confirmed through combat reports. Others were inferred from absence of communication. Missing entries accumulated in theater shipping offices and were forwarded to central registries. Administrative procedures required periodic dissemination of missing vessel lists to relevant departments. These lists included basic vessel data and last known information. No narrative explanations were appended. The documents reflected the state of knowledge at the time of compilation. As 1943 progressed, some missing vessels were reclassified based on delayed intelligence. Enemy claims intercepted by signals intelligence were cross-referenced with shipping data. Where correlation was established, status was amended. In cases without correlation, no change was made. By the end of 1943, shipping control offices maintained extensive archives documenting movements, losses, and unresolved cases. The records consisted of ledgers, typed summaries, escort reports, and correspondence. Each entry reflected information available at the time it was recorded, without extrapolation or conclusion. In early 1944, shipping control offices continued routine compilation of convoy movement data. Daily situation reports were distributed through Naval Command channels, listing sailings, arrivals, confirmed losses, and unresolved absences. Clerical staff compared convoy departure manifests against arrival returns received by signal or courier. Where discrepancies persisted beyond adjusted transit estimates, vessels remained listed as missing. No additional descriptors were entered unless supported by direct reports. Convoy operations in the North Atlantic maintained standardized procedures. Merchant vessels assembled at designated points under escort. Escort commanders logged course, speed, weather, and contact reports at regular intervals. When convoys altered route due to intelligence warnings or weather, revised instructions were transmitted by wireless. Ships unable to maintain convoy speed were ordered to detach. Escort logs recorded detachment time and bearing. Subsequent responsibility for detached vessels was not assigned unless another escort was available. If no arrival report followed, the vessel's status remained unresolved. Air patrol coordination increased along certain routes. Coastal Command aircraft filed patrol reports noting sightings, attacks, and areas searched. When aircraft observed oil slicks or debris without survivors or identification markings, reports were forwarded to naval intelligence. These observations were cross-checked against current missing lists. Where no correlation could be established, entries remained unchanged. In the Bay of Biscay and western approaches, intensified enemy activity resulted in frequent convoy evasive maneuvers. Escort after-action reports recorded engagements and ammunition expenditure. Confirmed sinkings were documented with time and position. In cases where merchant vessels were last observed intact during evasive dispersal and later failed to arrive, shipping control offices entered the last sighting information without attribution. Mediterranean convoy traffic increased in volume. Port authorities at embarkation points issued sailing orders under compressed schedules. Documentation was often completed after departure. Convoy commanders submitted departure counts and arrival counts. Discrepancies were reconciled through escort reports and port intelligence. Where ships disappeared without recorded attack or distress signal, entries were maintained as missing. In the Indian Ocean, convoy routing extended across wide distances with limited escort availability. Logs from escort vessels recorded prolonged periods without contact. Merchant ships reported mechanical difficulties by wireless before altering course. When subsequent communication ceased and no arrival confirmation was received, shipping offices recorded last transmission details. No inference was added. Pacific operations required rapid redeployment of merchant shipping. Naval transport commands issued movement orders referencing operational priorities. Departure records were maintained under variable conditions. Some ports lacked full clerical capacity due to air activity. Subsequent arrival data was incomplete. Loss confirmations depended on combat reports, survivor landings, or intercepted communications. Where none were available, vessels remained on missing status. Throughout mid-1944, administrative reviews were conducted at theater level. Missing vessel lists were circulated for verification. Intelligence sections compared these lists with new intercept summaries. In limited cases, correlation between enemy reports and missing vessels resulted in status change. Most entries remained unaltered due to insufficient data. Arctic convoy operations continued with seasonal adjustments. Ice reports were appended to convoy logs. Escorts recorded forced route changes and convoy scattering under air threat. Arrival ports documented ship counts. Missing vessels from scattered convoys were listed with last convoy position and time of dispersal. No additional remarks were entered. By late 1944, increased traffic density required expanded clerical staffing. Central registries consolidated theater reports. Files were organized by vessel name and registry number. Each file contained departure data, convoy assignments, last known reports, and correspondence. No summaries or conclusions were appended to these files. In early 1945, shipping continued under established procedures. Convoy losses decreased on some routes, while unresolved cases from previous periods remained on record. Periodic circulars reminded offices of reporting requirements. Missing vessel lists were updated to reflect current status without commentary. As operations progressed, some ports resumed regular commercial documentation. Late-arriving vessels previously listed as missing were re-entered as arrived. Corrections were annotated with date of confirmation. Other vessels remained unaccounted for. Their records reflected only what had been logged at the time of disappearance. By mid-1945, shipping control offices maintained parallel registers of active vessels, confirmed losses, and missing ships. These registers were distributed internally. Each entry consisted of factual data points without narrative explanation. The documentation reflected ongoing administrative tracking as events unfolded and as information was received. In July 1945, naval transport sections in London, Washington, Ottawa, Bombay, Colombo, Alexandria, Algiers, Naples, Manila, Brisbane, and Pearl Harbor continued to issue sailing orders and to record arrivals against schedules that had been amended by operational movement priorities and by changes in local port capacity. Convoy designations remained in use on several routes where mines, submarines, and air attack were still assessed as present risks. Merchant masters submitted sailing cards and received routing instructions that included lane assignments, blackout requirements, wireless reporting times, and procedures for separation. Port war signal stations logged time of casting off, time of crossing harbor control lines, and outbound pilot disembarkation. These details were entered into departure registers, copied to shipping control offices, and relayed as necessary through naval command channels. Overdue vessel procedures remained governed by standing instructions that required verification of departure date, route assignment, and expected passage time before a ship was listed as missing. Clerks calculated passage windows using convoy speeds and known diversions. Where convoys had altered course due to mine warnings or enemy reports, revised expected arrival dates were recorded on tracking sheets. A ship's absence from a convoy arrival list triggered a check against escort logs for any detachment entries, against signal center logs for any wireless transmissions received after dispersal, and against port intelligence for any information from coast watchers, survivors, or wreckage reports. Where no data appeared, the ship remained on an overdue list pending further reports. On Atlantic routes, escort commanders continued to submit after-action and passage reports in standardized formats. These reports included convoy composition, escort composition, weather, visibility, courses and speeds, sonar and radar contacts, gunnery engagements, aircraft sightings, and any observed losses. When a merchant ship was lost with confirmation, the report included time and position, conditions at the time, any survivors recovered, and any floating wreckage identified. When a ship was missing without confirmation, the report noted the last time the ship was seen in station, the circumstances of any convoy maneuvering, and whether any signal or lamp communication had been attempted. Shipping control offices entered these reports into convoy files and annotated individual ship records with the last recorded observation. Mines remained a continuing hazard in the North Sea, English Channel, approaches to continental ports, and parts of the Mediterranean. Mine watch warnings were issued through naval channels based on sweep reports and intelligence. Sweeping operations generated daily summaries of areas swept, mines cut, mines destroyed, and channels opened or closed. Port authorities issued navigation instructions reflecting these summaries, with specific lanes designated for entry and departure. When ships deviated due to weather or traffic congestion, harbor control reported the deviation when observed. Where a ship failed to arrive and had last been routed through mined waters, the record was annotated with route details and sweep status as of the day of sailing, without attributing cause. In the western approaches, air patrol reports continued to be filed by Coastal Command aircraft. Patrol logs identified search grids, times on station, sea state, visibility, and any sightings. When debris was observed, aircraft crews reported the approximate position, type of debris, and any visible markings. If lifeboats or rafts were seen, aircraft reported the count and directed surface vessels where possible. These reports were forwarded to rescue coordination centers and to naval intelligence. Shipping control offices cross-referenced reported debris positions with known convoy tracks and with missing vessel records. Where correlation could not be established, the report was filed without amendment to missing status entries. Rescue coordination centers maintained registers of distress signals, survivor recoveries, and unsuccessful searches. When a distress signal was received, the signal center logged frequency, time, content, and any call sign. The rescue center plotted the reported position and dispatched available surface vessels or aircraft. Search directives were issued with grid references, search patterns, and timing. Completion reports recorded areas searched, fuel expended, and results. Where a ship had been listed as overdue and a subsequent search found no trace, the vessel's file received the search completion report, with the notation of negative result. This did not change the official status without additional evidence. In coastal waters of the United States and Canada, port security and routing controls remained active. Merchant ships received sailing permits specifying coastal lanes and reporting points. Coast Guard stations and naval district commands maintained logs of vessels passing designated points. Reports from shore lookouts included sightings of vessels, explosions, fires offshore, and wreckage coming ashore. When wreckage washed up, local authorities recorded identifying marks when present and transmitted information to Naval District Headquarters. If no identifying marks were present, the report was filed with location and date. Shipping control offices reviewed these reports against current missing lists and convoy movement data. In the Caribbean, Gulf, and Western Atlantic, tanker traffic continued under routing instructions that varied with escort availability. Convoy formation was used where feasible. Independent sailings remained present for shorter routes or where port schedules required immediate departure. For independent sailings, scheduled position reports were required at designated times. Radio monitoring stations logged reports received. When reports were missed, stations sent repeat requests. If no reply was received, the ship's tracking sheet noted the missed report. Coastal radio direction finding stations sometimes provided bearings on transmissions, allowing approximate plotting of last known position. These bearings were entered when available. In the Mediterranean, port entry and departure were regulated by mine clearance status, air warning conditions, and traffic congestion. Ports in North Africa, Italy, and the Eastern Mediterranean recorded heavy movement of supply vessels, troop transports, hospital ships, and returning empty hulls. Movement orders often directed ships to proceed under darkness and to remain under emission control. When emission control was in force, scheduled reports were limited, and tracking relied on convoy commanders' communications and port arrival signals. When a ship failed to arrive under these conditions, the record reflected limited data, last port departure time, intended route, and convoy or escort assignment if any. Operational movement orders in the Pacific and Southwest Pacific continued to direct shipping between island bases, forward anchorages, and rear area ports. Naval transport commands issued routing instructions through movement control centers. In several areas, port capacity was constrained by damaged facilities and by congestion in anchorages. Ships sometimes waited offshore for berthing instructions and reported by signal lamp or short wireless transmissions. Anchorages maintained logs of arrivals, departures, and transfers of cargo and personnel. Where ships departed anchorages for forward areas under radio restrictions, tracking depended on scheduled reporting points and on the receiving port's arrival signal. At the theater administrative level, missing vessel cases accumulated in files that included all available documentation, departure clearances, convoy manifests, routing instructions, last signals received, escort logs, aircraft reports, coastal observation reports, rescue coordination summaries, and correspondence with owners or chartering agencies. Clerks maintained index cards for each vessel, with cross-references to convoy numbers and dates. Changes to status were made only when a confirming document was received, such as a survivor report identifying the vessel, an escort report describing the sinking with identification, an enemy record correlating with the ship and location, or a port arrival message. Intelligence sections continued to receive and distribute summaries derived from intercepted communications and captured documents. When such summaries referenced merchant ship sinkings, the information was compared to current missing lists. Correlation required matching of time, location, ship description, and cargo type when available. Where correlation was assessed as sufficient understanding criteria, the missing vessel entry was annotated with the reference and forwarded for administrative action. Where correlation was insufficient, the intelligence note was filed without a status change. Administrative action required review by designated officers and, where applicable, confirmation through additional channels before next-of-kin notifications or insurance determinations were initiated. As Allied forces entered additional ports and coastal areas, port records and wreck reports were collected where available. Naval liaison officers and civil affairs personnel forwarded captured harbor master logs, pilot records, and shipping registers when these were found intact. These documents sometimes contained references to foreign flag vessels, requisitioned ships, or craft that had departed under local orders without entering Allied convoy systems. Translation sections prepared extracts with vessel names, dates, and destinations as stated in the original. Shipping control offices compared these extracts against missing lists to identify possible overlaps. Where a missing ship was mentioned under a different name or under a local designation, clerks created cross-reference entries and forwarded the case for review. Prize procedures and captured shipping documentation generated additional paperwork. When ships were seized in port or at sea under operational orders, prize officers compiled inventories of papers, cargo, and crew lists. These inventories were forwarded through legal channels. If a seized ship had been listed as missing or overdue in another theater, the identification was relayed to the registry, and the ship's status was amended accordingly. In cases where a seized ship's identity was uncertain due to altered markings or incomplete papers, identification relied on hull numbers, builder plates, machinery serial numbers, and registry documents when found. Until identification was confirmed, entries remained provisional. Repatriation and prisoner movements produced new information on ship losses and disappearances. Interrogation reports of repatriated personnel and released prisoners were compiled by intelligence units. Standard questionnaires included inquiries on shipping incidents, convoy engagements, sinkings witnessed, and details of missing vessels. Where individuals reported being aboard a ship that had not been previously confirmed lost, the report was forwarded to shipping control offices. Clerks compared the reported ship name, route, and dates against existing entries. If the report provided date and position details consistent with an overdue case, the file was updated with the interrogation extract. Further corroboration was sought through other sources before administrative status changes were made. Hospital ships and rescue vessels submitted logs of survivors received from lifeboats, rafts, or shore landings. These logs recorded names, service numbers where applicable, dates, and circumstances as reported by survivors. Medical officers' notes sometimes included brief accounts of the sinking circumstances as stated during treatment. These statements were not treated as official confirmation without identification of the ship and supporting detail. However, when a group of survivors from a single vessel arrived and identified the ship, the report served as a basis for updating the ship's file and initiating casualty procedures. In several theaters, naval authorities issued periodic circulars reminding units and port offices of the requirement to submit timely arrival and departure signals, to preserve ship papers recovered from survivors or wreckage, and to forward any identifying debris reports. These circulars specified format requirements for signals and reports, including the use of standard abbreviations, time zones, and position formats. Compliance varied with operational conditions. Shipping control offices noted recurring gaps where reports were missing or delayed and issued reminders to the responsible districts. Where a vessel was listed as missing and later confirmed lost, casualty processing followed prescribed steps. The confirmation document was attached to the ship's file. A loss report was prepared listing crew and passengers, based on embarkation lists, ship's articles, and convoy passenger manifests when present. Next of kin notifications were prepared through authorized channels. For crew members not listed on formal documents due to emergency embarkations, additional verification was required through unit records or eyewitness statements. The ship's registry status was amended from missing to lost with confirmed date and position, or with best available information where position was uncertain. Some missing vessel cases involved ships that had been detached for repairs or diversions. When a ship reported mechanical trouble and was ordered to divert to an alternate port, the ship's tracking sheet was amended with the diversion instruction. If the ship failed to arrive, port authorities at the diversion port were queried for any approach reports or pilotage requests. Coastal stations were queried for any sightings. If no information was received, the file contained the last transmission and the diversion instruction. In cases where ships diverted to small ports with limited communications, confirmation could be delayed for extended periods, resulting in ships remaining listed as missing until a belated arrival signal or port log extract was received. Weather routing offices continued to issue advisories based on meteorological observations and forecasts. These advisories recommended route adjustments to avoid storms or heavy seas. Convoy commanders sometimes altered course accordingly. When ships separated due to heavy weather, escorts recorded the last observed position and any orders given. In some cases, ships were instructed to proceed independently to a designated point after the storm abated. If no subsequent report was received, the file recorded the separation order, weather conditions, and last known convoy position. In late summer 1945, signal traffic reflected changes in operational tempo in certain areas. Movement orders shifted toward occupation supply, redeployment, and the return of shipping to commercial routes were permitted. Ports reopened under controlled conditions, and shipping agencies resumed broader documentation practices. These changes produced a larger volume of paperwork, charter agreements, cargo manifests, port clearance certificates, and inspection reports. Shipping control offices continued to maintain separate war movement files and commercial documentation, cross-referencing as required. In European waters, the identification of wrecks and sunken hulls became a documented activity in some coastal sectors. Hydrographic and salvage units conducted surveys in approaches to ports, channels, and anchorages. Survey reports recorded obstacles, wreck positions, depths, and, when possible, identification markings. Some wrecks were identified by nameplates, hull numbers, or cargo residues. When a wreck matched a vessel listed as missing, the report was forwarded to registry offices as supporting evidence. If identification was uncertain, the report remained as an unconfirmed reference in the file. Mine clearance operations expanded in scope, with sweeping forces documenting swept lanes and reporting mines neutralized. These operations sometimes produced wreckage or human remains, which were handled under standing procedures. Identification efforts relied on personal effects, tags, and documentation recovered. Where identification led to confirmation of a specific ship loss, the information was forwarded through casualty channels. Where no identification was possible, the report recorded the recovery details without linkage. In the Pacific, naval transport commands processed large volumes of movement orders for return voyages, redeployment, and supply to newly occupied areas. Movement control centers issued instructions with designated routing, reporting points, and radio restrictions. Some ships were ordered to proceed independently between anchorages under local escort for limited distances. Records of these short-range movements were maintained locally. Where a ship failed to arrive at the next control point, the responsible center initiated queries to intermediate stations and to escort commands if any escort had been assigned. If no response was received, the the ship was listed as overdue in the local center and reported to the theater registry. Administrative exchanges between theaters increased where ships transferred between registries. A vessel departing a European port for the Indian Ocean under reassignment was transferred on paper from one control office to another, with the ship's file copied or summarized. Transfer messages included the last confirmed position, departure date, cargo and ballast status, and crew complement. If the receiving theater did not obtain arrival confirmation, both offices held partial data. In such cases, correspondence was exchanged to reconcile the last known information. Pending resolution, the ship remained on overdue status in the receiving theater and on transferred status in the originating theater. Shipping agencies and owners continued to submit queries regarding missing vessels, particularly for ships that had remained unresolved since earlier years. Naval authorities responded with available factual data, including last known convoy, last report received, and any subsequent intelligence references. Where records were incomplete due to emergency operations or destroyed documentation, replies stated the absence of records. No narrative explanation was appended beyond recorded facts. In some instances, ships listed as missing were reported by third parties as having been sighted in foreign ports or under different markings. Such reports were treated as unconfirmed until documentation was obtained. Naval attaches, consular officers were present, and liaison personnel were asked to verify through port records, ship registries, or inspection. If verification confirmed the identity, the ship's status was amended. If verification failed or the report could not be checked due to access restrictions, the report was filed as unconfirmed. As autumn 1945 progressed, demobilization and redeployment of naval units affected escort availability and reporting routines. Some escort vessels were reassigned, and reporting responsibilities shifted to fewer commands. Shipping control offices adjusted procedures by increasing reliance on port arrival signals and on movement control centers. For routes where convoy systems were reduced, ships were issued independent sailing instructions with required reporting points. Missed reports were followed up by signal inquiries. If no reply was received and no arrival signal followed, overdue entries continued to be created and maintained. The continued presence of mines, wrecks, and disrupted port infrastructure affected navigation and schedule reliability. Delays in port entry due to sweeping operations and pilot shortages resulted in late arrivals. Ships listed as overdue were sometimes located at anchor awaiting clearance. When this occurred, arrival confirmation was entered retroactively with the anchorage date and time. The tracking sheet was corrected to remove overdue status. For ships not located by such inquiries, the overdue listing remained, and the file continued to accumulate correspondence and search actions. Throughout these months, the core format of documentation remained consistent. Movement orders specified departure and routing. Port logs recorded actual departures and arrivals. Convoy manifests and escort reports provided mid-passage data when applicable. Signal centers retained transcripts of messages. Intelligence sections maintained correlation notes. Rescue centers retained search records. Each missing vessel case existed as a compilation of these documents, with annotations limited to times, positions, and administrative status changes supported by specific reports. By the end of 1945, central registries held extensive lists of vessels still not accounted for by confirmed loss, verified arrival, capture documentation, or wreck identification. These lists were maintained in active files for periodic review. Circulars directed that any new information obtained through surveys, interrogations, port record recovery, or intelligence correlation be forwarded without delay. Clerks continued to compare incoming data against the outstanding entries, updating files where documentary support existed and leaving other entries unchanged where no such support was received. In January 1946, shipping control offices continued to maintain separate registers for current movements, confirmed losses, and unresolved overdue cases. War movement ledgers remained in use alongside commercial clearance books. Clerical sections received arrival notices, port movement signals, and amended routing instructions as shipping resumed under varied restrictions in different sea areas. Where convoy systems had been reduced, independent sailings were required to report at designated points. Signal centers logged reporting failures and transmitted inquiry signals according to standing formats. In cases where ships did not answer and did not arrive within revised schedules, entries were carried forward on overdue lists. Harbor authorities in ports reopened to regular traffic maintained daily movement sheets listing vessels berthed, vessels anchored, vessels inbound, and vessels outbound. These sheets were forwarded to naval liaison staff where present and to shipping control where required. Pilot stations and traffic control posts maintained logs of pilotage requests and of vessels passing control points. Where ports were congested, ships were sometimes held at outer anchorages awaiting berths or clearance through swept channels. When such delays occurred, arrival signals were transmitted from anchorage control, and shipping control offices amended expected onward movement dates. Overdue entries were reviewed against these anchorage reports and corrected where confirmation existed. Mine clearance remained a continuing factor for routing. Naval authorities issued area notices based on sweeping reports and on hydrographic surveys. Sweeping flotillas submitted daily returns with lane coordinates, sweep methods, mines cut, mines destroyed, and lanes declared open for specified draft and width. Port instructions referenced these declared lanes. Movement control centers issued sailing orders incorporating lane coordinates, reporting points, and speed restrictions. Where a vessel's route intersected areas not yet declared open, special clearance was required, and the clearance document was filed with the sailing order. If a vessel departed under such clearance and failed to arrive, the file included the clearance and the most recent sweep status for the route corridor, without any assigned cause. Wreck survey activity increased in approaches to ports and in frequently used channels. Hydrographic units conducted sounding runs and obstacle identification. Survey reports listed object positions by latitude and longitude, depth, and classification where possible. When a wreck was identified with evidence of name, registry, builder's plate, or machinery serial numbers, the identifying details were transmitted to registry offices. Where identification could not be made, the object was listed as an unknown obstruction. Shipping control clerks cross-referenced identified wrecks against outstanding missing lists. When a wreck matched a missing entry by name or by confirmed registry identifiers, a file note was added and forwarded for administrative review. Salvage units and port authorities maintained records of recovered debris and of items brought ashore by fishermen, sweeps, or harbor craft. Each recovery report recorded date, location, description, and any markings. When markings included a ship name, shipping line insignia, or serial numbers on lifeboat fittings, the report was sent to the local naval district and onward to central registry. In some cases, recovered items were recorded as unmarked or too degraded for identification. Those reports remained filed by location and date. Rescue coordination centers continued to maintain archives of searches conducted during wartime years, including negative searches. These archives were referenced when newly reported debris corresponded to prior search grids. Casualty accounting offices continued to process unresolved personnel cases linked to missing vessels. Files contained crew lists where available, embarkation records, and subsequent administrative actions. For emergency sailings and irregular embarkations, verification relied on company employment records, naval personnel records, and statements taken under established procedures. When new evidence confirmed a vessel loss, casualty files were updated to match the vessel's status change. Where new evidence indicated survival or transfer, records were amended with the confirming document. Where no evidence was received, files remained open under standing rules. Interrogation and debriefing of repatriated personnel continued into 1946. Standard debriefing forms included sections on maritime incidents, convoy movements, and shipboard service. Statements were recorded with dates and places of observation when the individual could provide them. When a statement identified a ship and included details consistent with an unresolved overdue case, the extract was forwarded to shipping control offices. Clerks attached the extract to the vessel's file and requested corroboration through other channels where required. If corroboration was obtained through a second statement, a port record, or an intelligence reference, the case was marked for review. If corroboration was not obtained, the extract remained filed without change to status. Captured and recovered port records continued to be collected and processed where administrative recovery operations were ongoing. Naval liaison staff and civil authorities forwarded harbor logs, movement books, and registry extracts found in storage or archives. Translation sections prepared vessel lists and extracted movement entries. When entries indicated departures of vessels under requisition or under local control during wartime, the information was compared against Allied shipping records. In cases where a vessel name corresponded to a missing entry but the date and route differed, the discrepancy was noted and the matter referred for further checking. In cases where a vessel appeared under a different name, clerks created cross-reference cards listing known aliases and registry identifiers where available. Intelligence sections continued to maintain files of intercepted wartime communications, captured operational diaries, and enemy shipping claims obtained through official channels. Correlation work proceeded by matching time, position, and ship description. Where an enemy report described a ship by tonnage class, type, and route, correlation depended on whether a single overdue vessel fit the description within the stated area and time. When correlation met the criteria required by administrative instructions, a recommendation was forwarded to the registry officer responsible for status changes. Where correlation did not meet criteria, the intelligence note was filed. These actions were recorded as internal correspondence, with references to document numbers and dates. Shipping companies and underwriters continued to submit claims and requests for determinations. Registry offices responded by providing the current administrative status, arrived, confirmed lost, captured and recovered, or missing/unresolved. Replies included last recorded departure, last known convoy association, and any confirmed reports. Where a file contained only missed position reports and no further data, replies stated that no additional information had been received beyond the last recorded transmission or observation. Copies of such correspondence were filed with the vessel record. Movement control centers continued to issue and receive transfer notices for ships changing theater responsibility. Transfer notices included vessel identification, departure port, date, intended destination, and routing instructions. Receiving centers acknowledged receipt and assumed tracking responsibility. Where acknowledgement was delayed, originating centers sent follow-up signals. If a vessel was reported overdue after a transfer, both centers exchanged records to determine last confirmed data. The vessel file included the transfer notice, any acknowledgements, and the subsequent overdue report if applicable. Until resolved, entries remained on overdue lists with cross-theater references. Port state control inspections and seaworthiness checks increased as ships returned from wartime service. Inspection reports recorded hull condition, machinery condition, lifeboat and radio equipment status, and required repairs. Where a ship's radio equipment was found deficient, movement instructions sometimes included alternate reporting procedures through escort vessels or coastal stations. If a ship under such alternate procedures failed to arrive, the file recorded the reporting limitation and listed the alternate station assignments. Subsequent inquiries were directed to those stations to confirm whether any reports had been received. In areas where coastal navigation aids had been damaged or removed during hostilities, temporary aids were established. Notices to mariners were issued listing light characteristics, buoy positions, and restricted areas. Pilots and masters recorded these changes in voyage documents. Where a ship grounded or required assistance, reports were filed by local authorities and by tugs or rescue vessels involved. If a ship did not arrive and was later reported grounded by coastal stations, the overdue listing was amended to reflect the reported position and condition. If no such report was received, the overdue listing remained unchanged. The administrative process for altering a vessel's status from missing to confirmed lost required an initiating document and an approving authority. Initiating documents included an escort report identifying the sinking, a survivor group report identifying the ship, a wreck identification survey, or a verified capture record. The approving authority reviewed the initiating document and confirmed that identifiers were sufficient. Once approved, registry ledgers were amended. A formal notification was issued to relevant departments. The vessel file was marked with the amendment date and the reference number of the approving instruction. No amendment was made without such documentation. Where evidence remained incomplete, cases were retained for periodic review. Periodic review cycles were established by instruction in some registries. During review cycles, clerks checked outstanding missing lists against recent wreck identifications, salvage recoveries, port record extracts, interrogation summaries, and intelligence correlations received since the last cycle. Each case file was stamped with the review date. Where no new information existed, the file remained unchanged aside from the review stamp. Where new information existed but did not meet criteria for status change, the document was filed and the case remained on the missing list. Some unresolved cases involved vessels that had departed under emergency conditions without full documentation. For such cases, departure evidence consisted of partial harbor logs, witness statements from port personnel, or shipping company dispatch records. Routing instructions were sometimes not preserved. Where a ship was believed to have sailed but lacked a formal sailing order, tracking relied on any wireless transmissions received after departure and on any sightings reported by other ships or coastal stations. If no transmissions or sightings existed, the last known fact recorded in the file was the departure evidence with date and port. These cases remained among the least detailed entries on missing lists. Other unresolved cases involved ships known to have detached from Convoy due to mechanical failure. Escort logs recorded the detachment and any orders issued. In some cases, a small escort remained briefly with the detaching ship and reported the handover or separation. In other cases, the detaching ship proceeded alone. Shipping control offices queried intermediate ports and coastal stations along the diversion route. If the ship was not located, the file contained the detachment record and the unanswered query messages. Where a wreck was later found along the diversion corridor, survey reports were compared to the file. Across all registries, the record forms remained standardized. Convoy manifests listed ship ordering columns, with call signs, cargo categories, and master names where available. Escort reports followed prescribed headings. Signal center logs retained message transcripts in time sequence. Port movement sheets listed arrivals and departures with times. Wreck and salvage reports recorded coordinates and object descriptions. Interrogation extracts followed questionnaire formats. Correspondence was filed by vessel name and date. The outstanding missing lists were printed periodically with the same fields: vessel name, registry, tonnage, departure port, departure date, last known report, and remarks limited to documentary references. By mid-1946, some registries issued consolidated circulars to reduce duplication of inquiries. These circulars instructed local offices to forward any identification material from wrecks, salvage, or shoreline recoveries directly to the central registry with reference to the nearest known shipping incident date and location. They specified handling procedures for recovered ships' papers and personal effects, including sealing, inventorying, and chain of custody notation. They also specified that unmarked debris be recorded with exact shoreline coordinates and tide conditions where possible. Shipbreaking and salvage operations produced additional identification opportunities. When salvage teams raised hull sections or recovered engines, identification checks were conducted against builder records, machinery serial numbers, and registry data. Reports of such checks were filed. When an identification matched a missing ship, the report was forwarded to the registry office as supporting evidence. Where salvage material could not be matched, the report remained as an unidentified recovery entry. In late 1946, where sea lanes had reopened fully and convoy systems had largely been discontinued, movement control shifted toward peacetime forms while retaining wartime reporting requirements in designated hazard areas. Shipping control offices continued to hold outstanding missing files under retention schedules. Each file remained a collection of dated documents, with the most recent item often being a review stamp or a negative inquiry response. Where new evidence arrived, the file received it and was routed for review. Where no evidence arrived, the file remained in the active archive.